You
Yep.
may have gotten the message, but it still takes a minute.
Okay. Okay.
Wow, this is slow. All right, you're ready.
Okay. Thanks, Bart. Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. The first meeting of the SMAC committee for the 24-25 year. We're going to call this meeting to order. The time is 8:02 a.m. and we'll take roll call to begin. President, thank you. Dr. Scott. Thank you. Dr. Stovak. Adam Hunsaker.
Here.
Thanks, sir. Jeremy Haas.
Here.
Nicole McFarland.
Here.
Pam Sloan has already said she would be absent. Mark Deanza.
Here.
Rollin Stallworth. Kyle Lemons. Steve Rohr. Ernie Howren. Tim Jackson is present and Tia Wonder is present as well. Thank you, everybody. Public comment number 3. This time provides an opportunity for citizens to address the committee about any matter not on the agenda. Items raised during this portion of the agenda cannot be deliberated or acted upon. Should a member of the public wish to speak on a matter not listed on the agenda, it is asked that said person please complete a green public comment card and submit it to the committee chair prior to the opening of this meeting. Members of the public who have submitted public comments by email will have their emails read into the record. A limit of 3 minutes per person and/or 5 minutes per spokesperson of a particular group may be imposed. It is requested that comments be directed to the committee as a whole. Comments that are determined to be irrelevant, repetitious, offensive, inflammatory, willfully disruptive, or deemed to be personal attacks will not be permitted. We have no public comment here, and I have received nothing, and Tia hasn't either, so we'll move on. Item number 4, approval of the September 12th, 24 meeting agenda for possible action. I'm looking for it to be a flexible agenda, even though it's very small, but it's a first and a second. First, Dr. Murray. Dr. Scott with the second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Item number 5, approval of the 2024 meeting minutes for possible action. Meeting minutes matched in the packet. I didn't see anything in there that looked out of the norm or anything, but if anybody had any objections or anything, this is the time. But looking for a motion to approve the minutes. Dr. Murray with the motion.
Second.
Yeah, with the second. They're sitting, it's funny, they're sitting right in front of me. So all right, Adam, I'm going to tell you what, Adam, we're going to give you this one you got in there. We went back and reviewed the tape. You were actually in faster. So there we go. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Passes. Thank you. Introduction of new committee members for discussion only. Well, hi, I'm the new committee member. I want to thank you. I tell you that we sent out emails to everyone across the state to fill vacant spots. Oh, excuse me. Oh, good morning, Steve. And I was very happy that this committee stayed intact. The only open vacancy we have is a Southern Nevada Football Coaches Association member. And that has, I've requested that twice from the Coaches Association, and they have yet to bring forth a name. So we'll continue with it as an open seat until they determine who they want. Committee, but I would like to get someone on this committee from that group. So I will continue to work on that. So just so you're aware of what the plan is for today, the agenda is very vague and open. I included a lot of links. I wanted to turn this over to Dr. Murray at this point, as he is the chair and will continue in that role of this committee. But I wanted to thank all of you personally before we started and let you know that I look forward to working with this committee. And I think it's ironic, Mark, your face is the one that has popped up in front of me, and I probably wouldn't be sitting in this seat doing this.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Or working with this committee if it weren't for you. So thank you, Mark, for that. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Murray. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you and good morning. It looks like second here, let me get this volume turned up. We're on item 8 now, correct? Oh, seven, okay. All right, so it looks like we've got a couple things to discuss, mostly about emergency action plans at this point. And so are we looking at possibly endorsing some emergency action plans, requesting that individual charter members participate in this? What is the kind of next steps that we kind of have in mind in this?
Well, I can tell you from gathering this information, everything that's on here was sent to me by some member of this committee as a possible path moving forward, or an agendized item to discuss, or maybe even say this is our focus for the 24-25 year. So I know this one came directly from Mr. Dianza. I think, Mark, you sent me this, so I'm gonna yield to you.
Okay. Reason I sent this document came out in June of this past year. It's an update to the NETA's position statement on emergency action planning. The previous position statement was published in 2002. So this thing was 22 years in the making, and they finally got it published. And the one thing about the position statement is they gave 25 specific recommendations, both for state organizations and for individual members to take into account when emergency action planning. And from our standpoint, I think it's important that we understand what these recommendations are. And I mean, there are a couple that apply directly to us, and I think it's something we can do to help improve emergency action planning throughout the state to ensure all our schools are actually taking the steps to properly prepare for an emergency scenario, medical emergency, whether if you're doing sports or after school activities, it's something that they need to be prepped for. And I think if we take steps, it kind of leads to them taking more steps and improving the plans that they should already have plans. I mean, that shouldn't be an issue, but let's look at what the current information is saying, what the current recommendations are, and trying to go somewhere to try to improve what we already have in the state. And that's sort of why I brought this up. One thing that I think would be beneficial, and I haven't really talked to anyone on here about this, obviously, but in recommendation number 4, it says institutions and organizations should designate an EAP coordinator who facilitates the development, implementation, distribution, and review of the EAP. I personally would love it if we almost had a database of who those EAP coordinators are at each site at a state level. So that way they could sort of work with each other and bounce ideas off each other and see what other people are doing, kind of almost like a support network throughout the state. And at every school, that might be different. It might be an athletic trainer at some schools. It might be an administrator. It could be the principal. I don't know who it would be at each school. And I mean, maybe Jeremy and Nicole might be able to throw some input on this, but I think it would be helpful for us to have a database so we can try to improve these things together as a state.
Awesome, Mark. So I would argue and say at this point, what are some of the directions that we would like to go? Because I think this meeting is really supposed to be brainstorming about kind of things that we're moving forward with and things we want to put on future agendas or write position statements on to support or even form committees for at some point, like we've done with the concussion policy and the HEAT Act policy and those type of outcomes. So is there any other discussion on essentially how folks think this could be rolled out? Is this something that our committee wants to take on? Is this something that we want to then begin to push forward or endorse?
I can, Tim Jacks for the record, I can tell you that in the last 3 years, probably 2 years prior to that as well. I presented at the National Athletic Administrators Conference with the on EAPs, excuse me, EAPs. And I can tell you that it's one of my biggest concerns as well in the state. I'm concerned about the amount of knowledge about the practicing of the plan, the implementation of all the steps. I can tell you that it's a big concern I've always had. It's one of my driving forces, but I also believe that everything that we do kind of lends itself to that plan. Like when you have a concussion protocol, that's a part of your emergency action plan because that's part of the whole operation. So with emergency action plans, I think we can't go wrong. I do believe that we are looking though nationwide. There are many bills that are being floated out there at other state levels about requirements for EAPs. And I think it may be beneficial to our state association to get ahead of that and be prepared with what we're going to look at and what we're going to do. So I don't know if that needs to come from this committee or if that needs to come from the NIAA as a body itself and say, listen, this is our priority from an association standpoint. So I think that the conversation is good and I'm game to continue it in any way.
And I mean, I'll go back. There were two other things that it mentions in here specifically. Number 13 recommendation, institutions and organizations should make the EAP available. That's just having that available for visiting teams coming to your site so they know what to expect when they get there. It mentions pre-event medical meetings and how those should be run. And I think that's coming up in our agenda too. So I'll sort of hold back on that, but a lot of the stuff in our agenda today kind of tied into this document. And there was another one, I can't find it, but it mentioned that the organization, institutions, organizations, state and national athletic associations should provide educational resources for lay responders on management of catastrophic injuries. That was recommendation number 3 in there. So that one's kind of directly pointing at us that, hey, we're the state association. We should be sort of providing some of this information to our member schools. So it's something I'd like to explore a lot more. And in the future, definitely something I think we should be proactive in rather than reactive.
As a point of curiosity, Adam, do you guys have, or did you develop the EAPs for Carson?
So, interesting you brought that up. So yes and no. So when I arrived here, I did put an EAP together for the athletic facilities for kind of event management. In the last several years, though, I'd say the last 3 or 4 years, we've had our school district's director of safety services has become a lot more involved in that process at the district level and kind of come through and made her own plans. And frankly, we've clashed a little bit because I felt like those plans were focusing more on during the regular school day. And there was this really big gap with like what happens after school, you know, a large athletic event. And then also kind of differentiating the EAP that's necessary for athletes on the field as opposed to spectators that are in the building after. And I think those are two different responsibilities, you know, whereas I feel like in our role, our EAPs would be more suited to what do we do in the event of a catastrophic injury. If there is a natural disaster, lightning, whatever, like we're focusing on what are we doing with the athletes on the field as opposed to the entire facility, which obviously someone needs to be in charge and in control of that entire facility. But in my district, we're kind of speaking different languages a little bit, and it's been a little bit frustrating. For example, we hosted the state track meet last year, and we did have a meeting with our district personnel. We had a meeting with local fire and paramedics, and we did put a site-specific plan together. And I actually learned a lot about the whole incident management system. They introduced me to a lot of the forms that FEMA provides that I think we should utilize. So if we were to explore this further, which we certainly should, I think it'd be a good idea to bring in those district personnel, the safety, you know, whoever the director of safety ops or incident management for each of the school districts would definitely need to be looped into these discussions as well, in addition to the athletic personnel.
Thanks, Adam. Jeremy, Nicole, any thoughts on that? Have you guys had any experience with EAP development?
Yeah, I mean, ours down here is similar to what Adam was saying, that there's during a school EAP that the school has provided, and then they've kind of omitted what happens after school. And so that's kind of where we get involved, and we've created a somewhat of a standardized EAP. So we've told them kind of what needs to be included and what it kind of needs to look like, but it's up to the athletic trainers and the schools to kind of fill in the blanks. So I would certainly support what Mark's talking about getting some kind of database, or maybe what we need to do is at least identify the factors that need to be addressed on there. So at least everybody is consistently reporting or preparing for the same things, because I think we can kind of come up with a list that's going to identify the majority of the things that we need to be aware of. And maybe if we can provide that to the schools, they would feel a little bit more comfortable with their EAP, covering everything that they needed to.
And
Thanks.
just to piggyback on
Nicole,
that,
did you want to add anything?
yeah, sorry guys. Just to piggyback on that, I think we should also not forget about neutral sites that are being utilized for state and regional tournaments. For the last couple years, I've been doing sort of a mock EAP for like Thomas and Mack and stuff like that for basketball because it's our staff or it's me covering it. So it makes it real easy to run through with myself. But just something that we should not forget about, those neutral sites that are not our high schools, not kind of governed by the districts in any sort of way, but we still need to have EAPs. That's probably when we need it even more because we're not familiar with those sites. We don't have the keys to things. So just kind of not forgetting about those areas.
For sure. And at those sites, everybody thinks it's somebody else's job. And
Absolutely.
then nothing gets done.
Yep.
Awesome point, Nicole. Mark.
Yeah, and just sort of piggybacking off of what Adam said. I mean, he mentioned having a different EAP in the daytime for the school, and Jeremy said that as well, and having one after school. The new document actually says you should have a separate EAP for each sport. Like each sport should have its own EAP, which that's a massive undertaking because I mean, we have how many sports are we running now? Is it? Yeah, that's a lot of individual ones at each school. But one of the things in the EAP is you identify individuals who are going to be acting as care providers. So yeah, it's not abnormal to have more than one in a venue for different times or different things going on. And that's where the pre-event medical meeting, having something like that, where everyone just sort of says, okay, identify who's going to be doing what before each event. And just trying to figure that out, whether there's an AT or not. All our coaches are CPR certified in this state. Like, hey, these are the responsibilities should we have an emergency take place on the field.
So I think what would be useful at this point is, are we interested in possibly coming up with a series of maybe generic EAPs that we could then give out to the schools? So we could do one for, like elementary and then high school. Because I think that even though, yes, we're the NIAA and it's high school sports, we can develop EAPs for a lot of larger entities, especially neutral sites as well. I think that would be a useful thing for this committee to work on over the next few months.
There are templates out there, and there's actually a bunch of there's a lot of documents that accompany the new position statement. There's a whole folder full of things that we can look at and use. And yeah, I'd be happy to look into something like that moving forward.
Okay. Well, Mark, if you're interested and willing, if you wanted to possibly put those together and then email myself and Tim, and we can start putting maybe a repository together. And then at the next meeting, either bring it back and say, hey, we need some more cut language for the state. We need some cut language for the NIAA, and then do some assignments like we've done in the past for HEDAC and concussion policy, and see if that's something that we want to then put up on the site saying, hey, here's some language that could work for you. We highly endorse that everybody should have an EAP. I don't know if we're ready to go like the NC2A route where everyone sends their EAPs directly to us and we take a look at them. But, you know, there are possibilities for us with our specific expertise to provide some sort of a guidance on some of those things moving forward too, if people need help developing them. So if you're willing, Mark, that's totally fine.
I'm good. Anyone want to run with me or?
Yeah, I got you, Mark. I'll help you.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole.
Okay, awesome. Any more discussion on EAP? Because in the links here, there's also the NFSH EAP little handout. And then the medical timeout, which is and is not related necessarily. But let's stick with EAP for now. Any more discussion on EAP? Okay. Pre-event medical timeout. Did anyone in particular send this item in?
I think it came from Mark.
Novak or Deanza?
Wait a minute, no, hold on. You know what? I'm gonna tell you what, I think the medical timeout might have come from the NFHS to me, and I just threw it in there as a document to support any. A matter of fact, I think anything I got in the last month and a half that had anything to do with medical, I threw in there as a link, so if you wanted to look at it, you could, because I had no idea where we were gonna be headed today. So I wanted to, it was more of a shotgun approach to materials.
Any specific discussion on medical timeout from the BJSM article?
I've taken part in a lot of them. Every NFL game we do one. So I've seen it. We go over every situation and every scenario and talk about what's going to happen. And again, it ties in with the position statement that we just spoke about. It mentions that's one of their recommendations in there is to have one of those things. I don't know who initiates that or how it would start at the high school level, being that there's such varied personnel at everything. The one thing that is consistent at every game is an official. And
Is Steve on? Yeah, I see Steve. Steve, would you mind jumping in and seeing if do you guys have anything for medical timeouts? Is that something that you guys discuss?
No, we don't. When there's a medical timeout, we just clear the field and let them do their thing, and we don't resume play until everybody's completely off the field. If it's in football anyway, I'm not sure about the other sports, but in football, if there's a suspected concussion, which seems to be the primary thing we're dealing with in this committee, the player cannot return to the field. And that is our judgment. You know, if we suspect any kind of concussion, they're not to return. And frankly, we've never had a problem with the coaches wanting to get the player back in or anything. All the ones I've ever dealt with are concerned about this issue also. And, you know, they don't want to put themselves out there and risk liability of having a concussed kid get further injured just for the sake, if it's a star player or whatever. So I've never really had an issue with that.
So just for a point of clarification, when we say medical timeout, we're talking about a pre-game medical meeting between athletic trainers, head official, coaches, and a site admin, things like that, where we would discuss in the event of an emergency, in the event of something, this is what would happen. That would be an opportunity if you have an equipment like, you know, a pad on a cast or something that could be brought in and inspected, things like that. That's what we're talking about when we say medical timeout.
And
So I misunderstood.
And I can tell you where this, I now remember where this generated from my standpoint too. I did a brief training with CCSD athletic administrators on the, was it the 30-minute meeting, Mark? What was it called?
in NFL, we call it the 60-minute meeting.
60-minute meeting.
They're trying to get away from the term medical timeout for that pregame meeting because that's a term that we use like in game, sort of what Steve was talking about. If there's an injury, we call that one a medical timeout. So trying to use that pre-event medical meeting.
So I showed the video of the San Francisco 49ers meeting that the NFL put out and really stressed it. And we actually had a couple of schools, Desert Pines comes to mind right now. Desert Pines started doing it as a requirement of their administrative team. So the referees and the athletic trainers were already prepared. They knew their role and they were ready to go. but bringing in the administrator who perhaps was not affiliated with athletics into that meeting for that first time to know, hey, listen, if this type of injury occurs, you're going to be the one going this way. You're going to be the one going that way. That meeting is very, watching it was very interesting to see the number of I would call them, I hate that term, aha moments, but the aha moments within the administrators going, oh, I never even thought about that. That is really smart. We should know that because, you know, when an injury occurs, the movement of an ambulance is always an interesting way to look and see how prepared a school truly is. If they can get that ambulance to that injured athlete quickly without hiccup, you know they've prepared. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but I would say that is the number one. So that's where that came from. I remember having that discussion. And I remember there was also an incident, I want to say it was at Liberty football game. And the comment was made afterwards at how rapidly they'd got the ambulance on the field to the kid. And I said that was because they knew what they were doing. And I was very impressed by that. So I think that's where that came from. I don't know if this is like a statewide one or not. I know I just really like the idea of having the conversation of putting names with faces and, you know, and I will tell you too, Mark, after that video, I'm now very cognizant of who wears the red hat on the sidelines for NFL games. I try to find them now when I'm watching a game because I know what their role is, the unaffiliated neurologist. So I think it's a unique situation, but I think it's also prudent to know who that person is.
So I think then at this point, what would make a lot of sense is that as we look at putting together some more materials to update our basically EAP guide, which we already do have one on the NIA website as well, just so we're aware, but it does need to be updated. Because we committed it as updated because that's difficult. But at the end of that, I think it's something that we can easily put in there. And I really enjoy to have those medical meetings and before the game starts and has all things to is basically each one of those.
Nick, we can't hear you.
Excellent way to move forward.
Yeah, Nick, your microphone was wigging out for a minute there, just FYI.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I misread the meeting notice, and normally I'd be at my own computer, but I brought my laptop, so I'm hanging out the NIAA because apparently I don't know how to read this morning. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think the pre-event medical timeout is something to add into EAP guide that we can start to develop moving forward.
Yeah, just so you guys know, we're playing musical microphone here. Every time somebody outside of this room speaks, I got to turn one off and then turn one on. So there is a little slight delay between my index finger going left and right. And those of you that know me well enough, I am very slow in that manner. So I apologize.
Excellent. Okay. Any other discussion on EAP or pre-medical timeout?
Awesome. Okay, so we have Mark and Nicole are going to start collecting material for us.
See how we kind of want to work on that, and then we'll bring that back to our next agenda for the next meeting. So moving on to agenda item 8, this is kind of a collection of different heat activation, heat illness prevention, awareness, what to do if there's some
on there. And then also, which is very pertinent to us here in Northern Nevada right now, air quality and wildfires, unfortunately. So, was this brought up by anyone in particular? But I know that we've been working on
the heat information policy.
Please remind me because my brain is foggy
This morning.
Did we pass that?
We did. Okay, so we do have the heat act that's updated.
I think from my perspective, moving forward on this act,
These information, we have very good resources, but I'm looking a little bit more now at what type of equipment resources that we may have at this point for certain schools, because I know that there's a lot of schools locally here in Reno. I know in different areas as well, especially rural areas that we've worked with and talked to, they don't have the necessary equipment to kind of comply with or even meet the standards for the heat acclimation policy. So I did want to bring that forward as possibly something for generating some ideas on, are there grants that we want to pursue? Are there ideas locally that we can then begin to isolate? And one idea I had was going to some of our local rancher supply stores and introducing ourselves from the NIA and then giving the schools an opportunity to know where these locations are that they can get a dunk tank. And possibly if our organization is able to work with them, either get them donated or get them at a reduced cost necessarily. That was one idea, and I had already talked to a few local areas there. But I wanted to open that up for discussion if anyone would like to add to that, if anyone would like to generate some ideas on how we can possibly get some of these sites, especially in our rural areas, some of the equipment to meet up to the standards for HEDAC.
Nick, is it specifically the dunk tanks that's the biggest issue? Yeah.
So
That and the wet bulbs, Jeremy, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think every site has a wet bulb or has access to it.
They should have if they have football, was my understanding.
yeah, I think the
But-
vast majority football playing schools received a Kestrel a couple years ago.
Yeah.
As far as I don't know how NIAA sponsorships go or not, but I like the idea of going to a cow ranch or a Tractor Supply, and those two came up because that's where I got my dunk tanks. And saying, hey, we'll throw a banner up at playoff events if you donate a 100-gallon, 150-gallon tub to the local high school or something. Like, I think that's definitely worth a look. And I think those businesses in particular are, you can find a cow ranch and a Tractor Supply in every rural town in this state. So I don't think those will be hard to. That's a good idea anyway. And that's where I got three. I just got three. Again, I mentioned we hosted state track. And we were going to be without water. Our school, this was horrible timing. Our school was going to be, our bathrooms were getting remodeled. And so the weekend of state track, I had no water in the building because, of course. And so I have my own tubs in the training room, but so I kind of had to do a lot of pre-planning and bought 350-gallon Rubbermaid dunk tank. They were $120 a pop. So honestly, even for the smaller schools, it shouldn't be that much of a cost, but that may be something we could get someone to donate just because they're $120 for the 150-gallon ones, and they work great. So
yeah, that was going to be my point as well. I mean, I'm all for helping out the rural communities and doing what we can to help, but I mean, there's not much of an excuse not to have one at this point. They're not expensive. They're easily located. It's just, and because it's part of our policy that we made for heat acclimatization, I feel like it needs to get some kind of compliance. I mean, there's always the taco method as well and other things, but I think, there should be some kind of gold standard that we're sending out that this is where we can be getting these. And maybe we just start with a list of like, hey, this is where it is. This is how much it costs. This is the size you need, and just give people recommendations. We were lucky down here in Vegas that I can't remember if it was the NATA or something that came in one year, and they bought them for all of our public schools down here. So, we were gifted a bunch of them. So we were lucky, but a lot of schools had them already anyways.
Real quick, can I stop without? Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Got me? Okay. I'll talk louder. Okay. All right.
Sorry, because the we had to plug in the mic, which is, give us one sec.
Okay, now try.
Okay, we're gonna check.
You're coming back as a double echo, guys, doing it that way. So you're probably better off if you are on separate sides of the room with one person with the mic open at a time in there, because otherwise we're going to get a sound back echo. And right now, absolutely nobody else is unmuted. So if somebody wishes to speak, we will need the unmute.
I just unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can, but it sounds like you're at the back of a tunnel trying to talk to the other end.
What about now? How's that?
That is considerably better.
That was way better.
Okay. We're gonna have Dr. Murray talk. Can you hear? Go ahead, Dr. Murray, give it a shot.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes,
we
sir.
heard you.
Cool.
All
right, so jumping back to this. The equipment and implementation of the equipment. I know locally here, there are multiple areas that don't have a dunk tank. And so I would be interested in pursuing in some way that we could isolate places that possibly could have dunk tank access, or donate, or start doing some recruitment efforts to basically get those schools, or find the schools that maybe don't have it, that we can then get those equipment directly to them. So I would say that I'm willing to go ahead and kind of start that process. I'll start contacting the schools here in Northern Nevada and some of the rural areas. Maybe Carol, if you want to jump in with me.
Sure.
Okay. And then anybody, well, let's see. So Jeremy, since you're starting to work with a lot of the rural areas down there as well, do you know that they do have the dunk tanks?
I don't know. I can find out. We, we're not the ones running the athletic training for the rural schools, but I have a contact over there and I can reach out to them and find out if they do have those. And then we do have the contract with Nye County. So I can talk to those schools and I can find out what they have as well.
Gotcha. What I may actually do is come up with maybe a brief survey of a
I think that might
needs
be the
assessment.
best way. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I can develop that with the team and then shoot that around for some edits, and then we can send that out to each district and see what maybe the needs assessments are, and then work our way backwards from that.
Yeah, because we also want to make sure that we're including the charter schools and stuff down here as well. So I think maybe that might be the best way, is to create like a survey and just, and then see what responses we get back. So I mean, like questions like, do you have a dunk tank? Do you have that 30-minute meeting before the, and do you have an EAP for after school? Most of the CCSD schools are going to say yes, because we've implemented that, but I would be very shocked to find out if some of the charter schools and stuff have EAPs. I mean, they didn't even have concussion programs until we forced them to this year.
Good point.
And I think we
Okay,
could
so
maybe
I'll work
also,
on that.
we could also include who has the actual Kestrel, because I know it's not everybody. And I think that's the more expensive part of the equipment of our heat act policy. So that may be a bigger barrier than even the dunk tank for a lot of schools.
I have a comment. We can ask them if they have it, but we really need to ask if they're practicing their EAP and if they're using the equipment they have.
Yeah, that's a great point, Carol. Sorry, we're getting some weird feedback from our mic in here still. Are you guys hearing double still? Yeah, they're still hearing double.
Here and there, it's happening.
Yeah, a little bit.
Feel like I
Can you,
should go
can
in
you
the
guys
other
sit
room.
really close to each other and just talking to one computer by chance?
Probably so.
Uh,
I don't know if it's that, but that's okay.
Dr. Murray, what I think's happening is you guys are getting that feedback, that sound that's coming out of the speaker when one of you talks on your end. And the very trail of that then because there's just a slight delay. That's what's coming back in the backside echo. So, the volume in your room when one of you talks is going to kick back to the end of you talking. If it's somebody at another site talking, there's not going to be an
That's
issue.
I think that's exactly what's happening. So sorry about that. All right. That seems much better. Yeah, I've got volume up here. All right.
Let's check. Can somebody talk, Mark? Jeremy, somebody say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, how we doing?
here.
There we go.
Oh.
Cool. Okay, we're better now.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So to get through all the technical issues again, sorry. What we will do moving forward is we can put together a needs survey that can go out to all the schools on behalf of the NIA, or at least from our perspective, once it goes around. So we'll begin working on that, shooting that around to the committee to get some additions, changes, things of that nature. I would say that we should keep it brief in some regard and keep it very pointed. So it should be kind of like, do you have an EAP? Yes or no? Do you need help developing EAP? Yes or no? Are you aware of the HEAT Act policy? Yes or no? Do you have these pieces of equipment? Yes or no? Very simple thing. And then if people make responses on that, we can then reach out to individual sites with individual reps from the committee and help them in that regard, or say, hey, here is this. I've isolated this store locally to you that possibly could be interested in partnering with your school. Obviously, they can't donate it to the NIAA. They need to go directly to the school or the district. That would be my interpretation. Yeah. Any other discussion or additions on that plan of action? For the plan of action. Fantastic. Okay, so moving on, we went from item 8 to 10. Was there an item 9, Tim, or am I missing that?
Student, standard athletic training equipment kit.
Oh,
Did we miss it?
I don't have that in the meeting.
It's on the agenda. There were no additional.
Oh, okay.
documentation. That was the one we discussed a couple weeks ago about what they have, what they need, what they want.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so sorry, because I don't have that. Yep. Okay. So item 9 is basically looking at standard athletic trainer equipment kit. This kind of stems from spending some time at a couple different areas in town, at least here in Reno. And I hate to pick on Washoe County School District, but as most of us know, we are very short on athletic training and sports medicine staff here locally. There seems to be some ill-prepared kits, or the kits aren't necessarily paid for in the right funds, or we're moving in different directions to where they're not refreshed. And as everyone knows, if you've spent time in athletic training, sometimes things expire. EpiPens, those type of outcomes. And so coming up with a recognized standard of care, or essentially an equipment kit recommendation, I think would be good for us to pursue. And then possibly, if we find that we have some serious lacks in the community, that we could then pursue a grant to maybe purchase some of the equipment, like AEDs. Like that's a huge one for us. And there's a lot of really cool AED models that recently came out. We got a couple up at UNR that are so cool. I mean, like to the point where they're basically the size of a small tablet that can be fit in random spots. I know Mark is probably way more well versed than I am at this point on this, but I think that would be an interesting area for us to pursue moving forward. So I'd like to open up from discussion for essentially, is this something that we think is needed, that there should be some standard for athletic training gear in town, sports medicine gear, or like a checklist that we could basically endorse?
I think the checklist starts with having an athletic trainer and recommending schools have an athletic trainer. That's sort of where it begins in my world. But you got to have your emergency equipment, like you said, AEDs, having ice cooling methods, having just the emergency stuff is the bare essential. Like that's what you absolutely need, because you can't refer that stuff out. You have to handle that stuff on site. You have to have everyone trained. Like those are kind of the biggies. Everything else is kind of just nice to have. But you got to have your ADs, you got to have your AT, you got to have your cold water immersion stuff. Like those are kind of the biggies in my world.
I
Tim, we cannot hear you over here.
Nope.
know. How about now? Can you hear me now? Okay. Probably gonna need feedback a little bit for this one. We snickered a little bit that the trainer should actually be number one in the kit. I mean, that should be the first thing in your kit, without a doubt. And I think this is very important because as we look at standardizing the EAP, as we look at standardizing what the expectations are, what the minimums are, I think we need to get down that path as well, because at the end of the day, what I would rather, we talked about, Dr. Murray just made the comment about things expiring. Nothing would make me happier than every piece of equipment in my entire training room expiring because of lack of use. Because we never needed it. That to me is the goal. I mean, I know that sounds wasteful, but to me, it's an image that would bring me great joy that we never used a neck brace. We never had to use the immersion tank because it never occurred. As opposed to sitting in a courtroom saying, well, we knew we needed it, but we didn't get it. So I think that's very important. And I think this is a very vital as we look at moving forward with pushing the statement and the belief and the policy that there should be an AT at every school, period. There should be a minimum standard of staffing, and that is, it comes with a cost, but at the same time, that cost is definitely outweighed by the cost of it not having it. So I think that this is important. I think looking at what we have for our schools, it's almost as if, as we're talking, it's almost all falling together that, here's EAP, and right underneath the EAP is, you got to have these things as well. So I think we're on the right path here, and I couldn't support this more.
So I think it's because Tim brought up and Mark brought up the athletic trainer at every school, which is something that I know that we all want and desire. I think it's a good time to actually just kind of mention. This was going to go into our other item of agendas as well. But coming from our office directly here at UNR, currently, we are actually working on a new bill that will require athletic trainers at every single high school. We have already made some pretty considerable stride moving forward. We've already got some draft language done. We've got some key stakeholders. We even have possibly a few reps or state senators that are interested in sponsoring the bill. We're not sure if it's going to make it into this cycle or not. We've already met with different legislative bureaus to kind of have discussions about that. We're meeting with the Department of Ed. And this is external to the NIA. This is something that's coming directly from myself, although I think the NIAA will sponsor it. I don't see anybody not agreeing with that. So we're still working on that, but just letting you guys know that's coming down the pipeline. And I think I've discussed that with a few folks. I know I've emailed Jeremy also to just kind of let that aware. But I think because that's out there, I think it's important to note that we are actively working on this issue. And it's not just me, it's a few other folks who are being involved, Carol. I think it's a needs issue that we currently have. And so I think it would be a great idea to start the checklist with, do you have an athletic trainer? And if you don't, why? And then work your way through the rest of that equipment. Any comments, thoughts on either of those? I know I just kind of dropped a little bit of a larger item on folks.
Yeah, I have some thoughts. And obviously, athletic trainer at every school, awesome. But let's work in the reality that we live in as well. And so as a secondary school athletic trainer, one of the things that I think would be beneficial is when I'm going to a school that doesn't have an ATC, or when a school is coming to me that doesn't have an ATC, I would like to see them be a little more prepared if I have to go give services to one of their athletes because I'm the only athletic trainer there. So having a standardized list of, hey, on your sideline, if you could have a treatment table, that'd be awesome. If you could have a kit that has gauze, some tape, a shoulder, crutches, a shoulder, like some basic stuff where if I have to give service at a school that doesn't have an athletic trainer, I'm not dipping into my own equipment that I purchased specifically for my school. And that, and I'm happy to do that. And I've done that 100 times and I'll continue to do that. But if the schools that don't have ATCs could at least provide some of the proper equipment, I think having the NIAA giving those schools a list and like, this is the equipment you need to have. The schools that have an athletic trainer, most of the time, those ATCs are putting in their supply order. And so those are being taken care of. I think a lot of the problems we're seeing is the schools that don't have an ATC also don't know what to order. And so definitely having a recommended list of sports med, athletic training, first aid equipment, outside of the, I feel like the AEDs, the immersion, those are the obvious, the big ones, and they should definitely have that. But kind of secondary to that is, your gauze, your crutches, the treatment table, your slings, your tape, things like that.
Awesome, Adam. And I would absolutely 100% agree. Any more discussion on that? Because I think realistically, as we move forward, we could come up with a very quick and dirty, not that it's not easy, but essentially a recommendation list for all the schools to have on, and send it also to a lot of the ADs, because I can know that having worked with the ADs here locally that don't have athletic trainers, they are completely unaware most of the time, unless they come from these backgrounds, what's necessary, and it's no fault to them, at all. They don't have the necessary training in that. They don't necessarily get that. So I think we could provide that to them and say, when you get your budget and you don't have an athletic trainer and you have one coming, here's are the things that we really like you to have on hand for the game. Like they know how to, who was it? I was chatting with Reed, and the AD is handling all the water, which is great. I mean, that's a huge important thing, but it's not easy something to do. And so if we can give them some additional recommendations on some equipment to have there in a kit ready to go, that would be, I think, go a long ways.
I
Other
think,
discussions on-
yeah, I think that we also may want to be careful or be sure to include additional information so that unqualified people are not acting as an athletic trainer, because we're now giving them a kit. Because I know that we see that in the rural areas down here. And so that we're not kind of encouraging them to act as the athletic trainer, which then would kind of thwart the, I guess, support of wanting to get an athletic trainer in every school. Oh, well, we got this kit. We don't need to pay for a full-time athletic trainer. We all know that much more goes into athletic training, but from a school standpoint or a coach's standpoint or whatever, I just want to make sure that we're not encouraging unqualified care at those schools.
And so, Nick, maybe on your list, you might want to add in the word licensed athletic trainer when you're asking, because I won't throw the school under the bus, but there was a school that we're dealing with outside of Vegas, and they called this person an athletic trainer every time. She introduces herself as an athletic trainer, and she hasn't even went to college. She just works as a tech. So for like a local company. So yeah, I think making sure that Nicole brings up a good point there, because we don't want people to think that a well-stocked kit is a replacement for a licensed medical professional.
100%
And I
agree
agree
on
with,
that.
I agree with all of what they just said as well. FYI.
It's shocking that all the athletic trainers on the call agree. I've never seen that before. I love it. Yeah, no, I 100% stand by that. Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. But as Adam was saying, that having this kit with certain parameters could help the visiting athletic trainer to kind of get their job done most effectively, especially if they're having to treat for the other team that doesn't have those services. So.
Yep.
Okay, I think for then what would be us moving forward, Adam, since you seem to be the most passionate about it at the moment, are you interested in possibly sending us your checklist or what you think would be in a kit?
Yeah, and I could do a couple different versions. I could do like a bare essential, and then, in my mind, and I think about the kits that I pack for my own coaches that aren't ATCs, but if I send a team on the road, I pack them a first aid kit and send it with them. And that's mostly going to be obviously your emergency essentials. And for me, it's wound care stuff, like patch up some blood. Like I'm not sending a lot of athletic tape and stuff with, I don't need coaches taping ankles and whatever. So I could do like an essentials list, something more basic that you just send with the JV head coach. And then I could do something a little more extensive that, hey, if you know you have an ATC coming in from the other team, maybe you give them a station and provide them a little more supplies. So yeah, we could throw something like that together.
And Nicole, do you still have that, our list that because we obviously pack a ton of kits for our special events. I think Nicole and Jenna have a list already made up that she might be able to share.
Yeah, I have it somewhere. We have different sized ones based on different events and different kits that we use for our events, but I can dig through and find it. I have it somewhere.
Sorry, didn't mean to volunteer you in there.
Nowhere.
Sounds great. So I guess, yeah, I mean, sending all those materials to Tim and I is usually going to be the best bet. And we'll kind of compile things and bring it back for the next meeting to where we can either do some action items where we then discuss what needs to go into that final kit, put it together, and then distribute that as needed moving forward. So excellent. Thank you guys. That's a great points. Any other discussion on any of that? Fantastic. Okay, I think we're moving forward. Agenda item 10, which is the NIAAA program promotion. So, Tim, who sent this
That's
in?
me.
This is Tim.
This is 100%
Okay,
me.
I'm gonna be quiet for a
Okay,
minute.
can everybody hear me okay? Are we good? Okay, all right. So, I'm a big supporter and proponent of the NIAAA, which is the National Interscholastic Activities. It's the national group that works conjunctively or conducively with the NFHS. So this program is really number 10 is going to bleed into number 11. I'm a big fan of USCA, the U.S. Council for Athletes Health, because they have programs designed through the NIAAA that our administrators can take courses that help with very different aspects of athletic administration. But there is one section in there that I'm very a strong proponent of, and it's intermediate health, safety, and wellness requirements. It's educational programming for the professional development of an administrator that helps them with the health and safety of their athletes. It's program wide. It's not drilled down, in my estimation, to one aspect like an AT on the sidelines for every game, but it's more of the overall health of your athletic program. When I put this on here, I put it on here because it's an NIAAA thing. I'm a certification committee member until December when I roll off. So I work with a lot of administrators on the back side nationwide on building programs for their schools. And one of the things that USCA does is that. And it's a unique program. It's maybe not perfect for us, but it lended credence to what I really wanted to stress, which was ironically number 11. So USCA was just information out there I wanted to share. It was not really anything more than a way to show our administrators as we go forward. Listen, not only is this good for your kids, but it's good for you as a professional, because I've used the phrase so much here recently, I don't know what I don't know. And not knowing is difficult to overcome without places to go find that information. So one of the things that I'm going to stress from my office with our relationship with the NIAAA is that the things that the SMAC is doing, the things that the Rules and Regulations Committee is doing, the things that sportsmanship is doing, all tie together to the development of a better overall athletic department within your school or your district. I think we've kind of gotten away from that over the past, I would say my career, 25 years, I've seen a divergence in the importance and the impetus put on the athletic departments of schools over the costs and the prohibitive limitations on time, facilities, et cetera. So I want to really start stressing the NIAAA back to our administrators, because the turnover rate also is atrocious. We've burned them out. They've moved on, or they didn't want to be there in the first place. I kept a very detailed document when I was down in CCSD, and I try to avoid talking about that as much as possible because it's not where I get all my information. But I had a list of every principal, AP, and AD on a spreadsheet for my very first day with their phone numbers, a common contact sheet. But what I would do is I would cross out the person who left and write in the new person who replaced them and not create a new sheet, just simply write on it. And what I did was I wanted to see the turnover rate. I was in that office for almost 5 years to the day, and there were only 5 people on the list that had remained from the day it started. And to me, that's very telling of how fast we're turning over. But more importantly was the number of people who turned over in the same role at the same school. And I think USCA is something that we should look at as a piece. So I'm bringing USCA to all the committees, not as a, hey, listen, we need to promote this, as just that you understand that my whole process for all the committees is it's creating a better athletic department for our schools and a better athletic experience for our kids. So as far as USCA goes, it's just information if you want to look at it. If you don't, you can delete it and move on, and we'll continue to focus on our road. With that, I am done with number 10. There's nothing else anybody needs to ask. I will share it with anybody who wants to know.
Roger, so it seems like item 10 and 11 are bleeding together for
Yes.
this one. Okay. Any discussion on 10 or 11 outside of what Tim already mentioned, or I mean anything realistically?
Okay, now I did want to talk about 11. Okay. I think it's time this group looks at the NFHS Learn course requirements for 798. Basically, the 3 requirements, the concussion protocol, the coaching, and the first aid. I think it's time we look at that, and I think we need to beef up what we are requiring our coaches to do from the aspect of the requirements. I think there are courses out there that would be great for them to take that would be within the SMAC umbrella. And I think that we should start to look at that, because I do believe we need to increase the educational component for our coaches. I like the fact that once you take the course, you're in it for life, you've done it. But just like anything else in life, if you don't do it ever again, you lose that ability to do it well. I mean, I learned how to drive a car when I was 16. I still drive a car, so my skills continue to hone. But I can tell you this much, I haven't jumped over a hurdle since I was 15 years old. I guarantee you I can't do it as ineffectively as I did it back when I was a freshman in high school, because I don't practice the skill. So I think I know that this is a push from Ms. Sloan as the president. She talked to me about this. I'm going to bring it up at the board meeting as well as part of my discussion with the board, that I think we should look at 798 and perhaps look at some of the courses NFHS Learns offers that would be beneficial to our coaches and our administrators as well, that maybe it's time we increase those requirements from the NFHS on our coaching certifications.
Discussion on NFHS Learn and courses for coaches at this point.
Do you have specific ones in mind that you were thinking about, Tim?
Go ahead, Jeremy. Sorry, I was muted.
Oh, and I was just wondering, because I'm on the NFHS website, because to be honest, I mean, I'm not super familiar with what the coaches are currently going through. So I was just asking if there was specific ones that Tim had in mind for adding into their coursework.
Tim, you're muted.
Yeah, Tim, you're muted. We can't hear you. We see you. You're very animated, so I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Sorry about that.
You good?
Okay, got me now? Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, I was willing to take the lead on this one and go out and see what courses were out there. But I also wanted to say, if I bring them back and we look at them and say, yeah, this is nothing we want to put our hands on, then I'm happy with moving it to another area.
Do we know which ones they're currently required to take? I know they're required to take a concussion one, right? But we don't know any of the other ones.
Yeah, they take a concussion, a first aid, and a CPR.
So, and are you talking about the NFHS like core courses?
Yes.
Just on the web. Okay.
Well, I think that if we generating a list of what we have currently, because I don't think everybody on this committee knows what's required of the coaches, since we don't sit on that committee and we don't go to the larger board of control necessarily meetings. If we feel there are any, I guess the ask at this point would be for us to generate a list of what's required. Then seeing if folks are noticing anything on these education parameters and courses that we feel are important that we as a SMAC committee could review and endorse. Because I'm seeing a lot of here, like, the collapsed student and things of that nature, that seems pretty reasonable. But
Right.
like
Sudden cardiac
teaching and
arrest.
modeling behavior, and then you have to pay for it. I mean, sure. I think all of us could use some extra training on how to be a good model sometimes. But I'm not sure that that's necessarily something that this committee even has jurisdiction over, saying we want to heavily endorse this.
Well, I also think that would fall under the sportsmanship committee,
Mhm.
which is one of the, once again, this is a big umbrella and trying to pull in, but yeah, like the sudden cardiac arrest one, the collapsed student. I think there's things out there, and I wanted to go through, maybe I could put together a list and share it out with everyone and say, hey, this looks good, this looks like something we could get behind. Because once again, this would be a regulation change, so this would take time. This isn't something, as well as you guys know, going through the concussion regulation. It takes time and it's not gonna happen tomorrow. But I would like to see if maybe we can start looking at some of the increasing the requirements or expectations that we put on our coaches, because they are teachers on the field. That's the key.
Yeah. I think it's a good point. I mean, I just real quick and looking through them like you guys are. I mean, the collapse student, the sudden cardiac arrest, student mental health, heat illness prevention. There's a lot of them on there that would be applicable to what we're talking about. And personally,
And
would love to
those-
see this communicable skin infections one required for all coaches
Wrestling
that tell me,
coaches.
oh no, that's Matt
Wrestling.
Byrne. That's Matt Byrne. That's
Yeah.
Matt Byrne.
And the
So,
ones Jeremy just listed off are all free as well.
Yeah.
So,
So I think what would make a lot of sense then, since I mean, I'm personally not super familiar with these. What I always do is, this is what I do, and this isn't what everybody else should do, is that I generally, if it's a free course, I usually will review some of the ones that I'm interested in, especially if we're going to make it like we endorse this. So I think what will be very pertinent is for everybody who's interested to take a look at this, or at least I can, and maybe a few others, to see which ones and take some of these courses, and especially the ones that we think are good and that we would like to endorse, and then make sure that it has the content that's expected. Um, and so that we can then send that out. Like if we, for example, I did this with the concussion policy and helping all the schools out, because the education side of that piece that had to go to the schools, um, I took all the courses so that I was aware of how long it took for each one and what's expected of it. Because the other consideration is that if we say, hey, coaches, you must do these 10 trainings, we may lose coaches, because some people are just like, why? I don't want to do that. I'm not interested, or I'm just helping out in a certain regard. Why do I need to do some of these things? And so I can see Rollins indicating to us and saying from his coaching background, and like let's not overtax the amount of time that's required for the coaches to do all of these different parameters. So discussion on that, or is that a viable option moving forward for us each to review various outcomes that we're interested in and then bring those back to the committee for the next meeting?
I mean, I hear what you're saying. Most of these, the ones that I listed off are all, they say approved for 1 clock hour. So I'm assuming they're probably going to be an hour or less, except for the mental health one. That one says it's 3 hours. So that's a little surprising, but I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I think these kinds of courses have almost become standardized. I mean, I teach at UNLV, and every semester they make me take all these little courses again about HIPAA and OSHA, and my company requires all of our employees to do it every single year. So I think just once, there might be some pushback from some coaches initially, but as long as these courses are providing the information we want them to provide, I think it's willing to ruffle a couple feathers to make sure that they're understanding what's going on. Because concussion one's great, and I think that one's really important to keep on there. And the first aid's fine, but how many of those people are using any of the first aid stuff where a collapsed athlete could be the difference between a life-saving and not,
I will say though, on my end personally, having worked with a couple of school districts for the concussion policy, there was some very strong pushback on the amount of time required to do the CDC heads up training, which was about 15 to 20 minutes.
Yikes.
So I know we say this is important and I know we can state these outcomes, but sometimes people are going to push back super hard with anything else they have to do, especially as a teacher. I mean, Adam, right? So you're currently teaching the sports med groups and those tests.
Yeah.
How many
I haven't
courses
had a
do
lot
you
of-
take?
How many? A bunch. Like Jeremy was saying, I take a HIPAA, FERPA. We had a displaced student, a McKinney-Vento training. There's about 8 trainings that everyone in the district has to take every year. And I'll be real honest, it becomes a mouse click fest to the end of the quiz, and then I take the quiz because I remember the answers from last year, right? So there's that element to it.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. So it may be one of those where it's like we can come up with our top that we were, as an NIA group, we recommend the coaches or require the coaches to complete are ones that are life-saving or the ones that you should identify, and then giving a list of like, if you're having, here's some recommended courses you can take to help expand your toolbox. And I think that may go over a little better, that we'll have some coaches go like, I actually do want to take that 3-on module on mental health because like I had an athlete that was suffering with depression or those type of things. And that could be something where if we provide the resources, someone may be more interested in going down those rabbit holes.
Well, and as we've kind of had this talk, I had the thought, and I don't know if this is getting too much in the weeds, but if you have a coach that is on staff in a school district, they're going to be taking a lot of those trainings as their job as a teacher or a staff member that covers, for example, the mental health one. There's a student mental health and suicide prevention training that we do every year in our district, and I'm sure that's in a lot of them. And so maybe, I don't know if this is, again, getting too into the weeds, but if there's a coach that's not a school district employee that we can't verify, they would have had this training somewhere else, then say, an off-site coach maybe recommend these courses or something like that.
We don't collect the coaching.
Yeah, I don't know if we even have that data. Exactly.
Oh, we do.
We do.
Okay.
Oh.
We do actually. So then, yeah, I mean, that's.
So we have a system. Sorry, hold on. There you go. Okay, so we have a system called Final Forms where the coach has to upload all of their documentation, and when their concussion expires, they're notified and they become unclear. They turn red, so they have to. So they have the courses are put in there. The expiration date on some of them is infinity, so it never expires. Concussion is 3 years, and there's a countdown clock and everything. We monitor it, and they cannot be on the sidelines. Can be fined or have sanctions put on them for using coaches that are not cleared. And it's a whole system, but it is there and it's very effective. That's where this would be housed. That way there's no monitoring on our part, that it's monitored within Final Forms. They would do that, and then we monitor Final Forms. So that aspect of it is available, but I agree that I'm writing down some of the concerns and sending myself notes already. Don't overburden, no additional costs. I think that's another one that's important, looking at them, and then the purposefulness of the course. Is it like I was sitting here thinking, the bus video that we all in CCSD had to watch for bus safety. I had nothing to do with buses. I had no idea what they were talking about, but we all had to watch the bus safety video, and it became one of those things where, like they were saying, was by the end of the video, I could just click through the answers because I'd taken the same video so many times. So it became rote. And so I think that the importance of it being relevant, timely, and of purpose is definitely going to be a key.
Excellent. Okay. So the then kind of action for this is to, I guess there's an ask here, is that if folks are interested to take a look at these particular courses, and maybe come back to the next meeting, and we'll send out an email reminder about this, but just things that you think the coach or the folks who are involved in the care of the athletes should be aware of, and maybe some of the training that we can then say is required versus not required, or recommended versus not recommended. All right, I think that's all I have on our end. So I'm gonna throw that back to, oh, we got future planning. Item 12. Sorry, I have I think I have the wrong packet in front of me. That's fine. So item 12, we're looking at future agenda items, and I'm going to open the floor for this. And then I'll just speak a little bit very briefly on what we're planning on doing with possible AT bill in the state.
I don't know if this is for a future agenda item or not, but I don't know what you guys are seeing up in the north, but we're getting some pushback from some coaches and some parents about the heat index stuff, or the heat bill that we put forth, and why it's not being used in games. Obviously we have very strict rules for practices and stuff, but it not applying to games. There's been some pushback. And some of it is by football coaches trying to convince us that the games need to be moved back to 7, because all of our games down here are at 6. So some of it may be some selfishness, but I'm just curious if you guys have got any pushback on that, and if that's something we need to discuss. I mean, I know that the KSI and everything recommends that we don't have those restrictions in place for games. I just wasn't sure if you guys were seeing some of that as well.
Yeah, the only pushback I've received, or any information I received, was there have been a couple of calls made up here about the start time of varsity football games in Clark County. And I will tell you, what I told them was at the district decision, that they made the decision as to what time they were going to start. Also, I had a couple of requests, I think I want to say 2, maybe it might have been just 1, it might have been 1 on a phone call, for the heat index policy, the whole thing, and I sent it to them. I showed them where they could find it if they needed it again. But those are the only 2 concerns that have been brought to my office. But I will tell you, I do believe it was definitely geared towards varsity football, and it was geared at the CCSB determination for 6 o'clock kickoffs. And that was very clear in the conversation that I had with the parent that called here, that it was about why are they kicking off at 6 and not 7 like other schools.
Right. Okay. The other thing I had was in regards to concussion, and those schools that have not necessarily kind of fallen in line yet with what the NIAA policy is now. What are the repercussions for that? What are we doing to ensure that these schools do or have adopted the policy? Have we thought about any of that yet? Or
Well, I want to jump in here real quick because I know Adam unmuted. So Adam, did you want to contribute to the discussion before we jump into?
No, I was gonna say something and then the moment passed and I forgot to read.
Okay. Okay, so let's take a step back. So in terms of HEAT Act and policies, again, district-wide decision, I guess, individualized gets to make those decisions. So if they have questions, refer them back up to Tim here. And then for concussion side of it, I mean, we don't have any way of, we're not the governing body that is enforcing this. We put out a policy, we were mandated to put out our side of the policy. Department of Education was put out theirs. For people who are not in compliance, who are not working on those, who do not have a policy, I am not sure how the state is going to enforce that. I don't know if has anyone seen anything, heard anything on that regard?
I can also say I've not. I would believe that it would go through the Department of Ed to start, because it is a Department of Ed policy. They were primary. But also I think our office should be notified so we could follow up as well, because we do have a policy that they're supposed to be adhering to. So we would need to have knowledge of that. If it was a district school, we would then refer that person directly to that district and find out what's going on there. But Jeremy, you bring a very concerning point to light, that if we have schools that aren't following the policy, we need to be cognizant of it, and probably looking at what the procedure would be for a school that is willfully ignoring a policy. Because that, to me, that puts them in jeopardy as a member in good standing.
Yeah.
We have a regulation that says, as a member, you will follow our regulations, and you are willfully. It would be no different than if you willfully put a child in that was ineligible to a game. You willfully chose to not follow a regulation. So I think that would be something we would have to look at closely.
We add that to the questionnaire we were going to send out about, do you have an athletic trainer? What's your kit look like? Do you have an AED? The questionnaire you were going to send out, can we ask them, have you adopted a concussion policy since the NIAA has issued its kind of mandate? And, basically maybe have them explain it briefly, and then we can kind of help them, because we don't, again, like I agree with what Nick said, we're not here to play police, but we do need to, since we created the policy, we have to kind of do some follow-up to make sure that people are doing what we've asked them to do. Otherwise, it doesn't do any good to put policy out in the world if we're not kind of, following up on it.
And I do believe that it would be important for the Board of Control to lead that, because they are the final authority that did adopt the policy. So let me bring that up in my discussion with the board. I'll talk to them and find out what their thoughts are, and we'll figure out where we stand.
And I do want to echo those comments from Jeremy and from others on that I know that personally, at least Carol and I have worked with quite a few different schools. Mineral County comes to mind, other places that are working very diligently to get their standards up and working and trying to isolate different items and outcomes that they can kind of move forward to help those. So I think, Jeremy, if you're hearing things through the grapevine, or maybe someone saying this person's not doing it, I mean, we can discuss it offline and see if there's extra help that needs to go that way, or send that survey back out saying, hey, adoption was July 1st. Do you have it? Do you not have it? If you don't have it, how can we help? And I think that's one of the best approach to go through, because as we all know, if we put a policy in place and it's passed in the middle of the summer, everyone's going to get all this stuff the first day they come back to classes. And some of these things will be just straight up missed. And it's not the fault of anybody necessarily. It's just a lot to do when you come directly back to it. So I think we do need to have to understand that policy does take time to implement, and be patient to a certain degree. But, patient only goes so far if it's a year, 2 years type of thing. I mean, we're definitely at that point, you've had all the information you've needed to make your informed decisions on how your policy is going to go. And Carol, I know you wanted to add something on, did you want to reviewing policies possibly?
Yeah, it would just be, is there a way to say in that survey, hey, can you send us a copy of your policy?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many school districts are out there.
There's you just asked me that. It's got
6.
it's seven. I think it's seven. Was it 17 counties? Carson,
Okay.
charters, privates.
Okay. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe Jeremy's idea of, can you briefly tell us how it's, I don't,
Well, is it required, or is it something that the NIA can do, or is it something that we should do? If we're collecting like coaching certifications and those type of things, if we put out a policy, shouldn't we have a link or a storage of all of the concussion policies as well?
I think it depends on where it falls down into what umbrellas it's falling under. Is it fall? And to me, this is falling under the Nevada Department of Education right now.
So I think that's where we would have to look and say, the contact would be made is, hey, are we monitoring this? Are you following up with this? And not, because they use the NIA policy as a part of that to fall under the whole umbrella, because it wasn't just a 9-12, it was a K-12 program to monitor that. So I think we'd have to look at that and say, okay, maybe we're overstepping, or maybe we are opening up a can that they didn't know existed. That, yeah, because I do believe they have to provide the adoption. They had to adopt a policy, but I don't know if they were given a window of when it had to be done, or if they were given extended, because I know there was some clarification issues in the summer as to when they could do, and the board has, not our board, the boards of education, have their policy adoption procedures that may not be the same for everyone. So I think that's where this would fall. This might be one of those things where I need to reach out and find out from the Department of Ed, hey, where are we with this? What do you need from us? What supports are in place for those that aren't able to adopt? And why aren't they able to adopt?
Can we help them?
And I know that at least locally here, again, because we're involved here, and I hate to keep using that as an example. There were some issues with the student athletes and the ADs getting access to some of the parameters to notify the school nurses that there was someone in return to learn, because basically they are responsible as Department of Education for the provision of return to learn. And there's just been some hiccups in the system or clarifying credentials, things of that nature. So, okay. So I think what would be smart moving forward is to kind of keep our ears to the ground, look at what we can and cannot do, develop or modify the existing survey to send it back out to kindly remind people. And if they feel so inclined, if it's within our jurisdiction, to have them attach that policy. And we don't necessarily have to be the ones to review it, because that's not our job. As of now, I would say. And then we can just have those on file, or because if somebody asks, if a parent asks, where's this policy? We have the NIA policy, but I'm in Mineral County. How does this work? And then we can point them back in that direction and be more of a resource at that point, rather than a stick, I would say. Carrot rather than stick. Questions or discussion on that? Awesome. Okay, other future agenda items that we want to kind of look forward.
This is Mark over here. I was actually curious, what specific medical policies do we have in Nevada at the moment? Like, that's something I'd like to sort of examine in the future, see what we have on the books as is, and what may need to be modified, and or what holes we might have. Just sort of, again, trying to be proactive and just trying to see what we actually have on the books from the NIAA perspective. And sort of going along with that, I'm curious on if we have information on the number of participants by sport, and if that would kind of help guide some of the policies that we look at.
We do have a number of participants, Mark. We have that, and the FHS actually has it as well. So we can look at all of that. When you're talking about the medical policies, are you talking about within NIA regulation, or are you talking state regulation?
That's a good question. That is a good question. I don't know what I'm looking for in that. I mean, like, we obviously have the heat policy, we have the head injury policy. Those are the two that we've worked on since we brought this committee back in 2022, I believe. I'm like, what did we have before we came in, and what's there, and what should we revise? Because there was obviously a hiatus of the Sports Medicine Advisory Committee for a while here, and I mean, now we're in our coming into our third school year doing this. Like, let's try to start making some steps forward and just knowing what we have. I mean, yesterday I got a ton of questions about air quality. I know Reno's getting a lot of questions about air quality too, and I sent Tim the text yesterday, hey, do we have an air quality policy that's specific to Nevada? And just sort of seeing what we have and what we don't have, whether it's from the state side or from the NIAA side.
So I would say, Mark, that on our website, we do have different policies and links to things. That might be the perfect place to start, because if it's not there, then it's probably something we don't currently have. Because I'm looking at this, so Carol and I are looking at this, and we have, like, our skin diseases policy but it's the position statement for like wrestling and safe weight loss. And I know things we have discussed, but not necessarily our policies that we have developed or are on. And that's obviously within the mandate of this board to kind of advise folks and say like, hey, this is something we should have. Like another example should be like safety equipment. There's a lot of discussion currently, and I can bring this up because I've now given a couple different interviews on like Guardian Cap usage and things of that nature. And I'm getting a lot of questions locally and also from other areas. People will email me asking about like Q collars and those type of things. And so, you know, obviously everyone's got their individual discussion points on that, but that may be something to where like equipment endorsements for certain points and saying like, hey, this is an add-on. This may or may not have the effect you want, or here's the evidence to support it. Those are all things that I think we can kind of look at developing and then shooting out to people, I think, moving forward.
So we're looking at just the stuff on this miscellaneous sports medicine. That's all we have, or are there other medical related things that we should be aware of that aren't listed here?
I'm going to throw that over to Tim. We're on the website, Tim.
Where are you? That's what I'm wondering. Which website?
Yours.
And
Yeah,
Under
Yep.
the SMAC.
miscellaneous
So we
information.
also have, let me get their committees, where I'm at, committees. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I wasn't there. Okay, so, we have obviously the SMAC page, but we also have, if you go up there under publications, you have the NIA handbook, which is all the regulations. I think that's where you would start going through, and that's where I was just now. There's very little, in the realm of medical in that area. I think that's where we would have to start to look to see. The other thing we would have to, Mark, I think what you brought to light is a very unique question, because our regulations reside in, you know, the NRS and under the NAC, the 385B. So we talk about those often, that they're pullout. And I think what you've asked is a very, very poignant question, because not only do I think the medical regulations and policies that we have within the SMAC are important, but I also think there might be overarching medical and regulations that encompass schools that are not listed in our NAC. I think it's one of those things where we might have to go on a little, I hate to say it, like a deep dive or a scavenger hunt of sorts, and cobble together what we've got out there or don't have out there and see where we sit. I think this is, I had never thought of this, that you know, where are our medical policies? Because the new concussion policy doesn't reside in the our 385B, it resides in the state statutes. So I think we have a unique opportunity here to start looking at those. I will tell you that as a staff, one of the things that we're starting to do is this. Our regulations are updated by the Secretary of State, and sometimes the regulation passes and it's done real quick. Other times the regulation is passed and the change hasn't been put in there. So people go in there and look, they'll say, hey, this is out of date. Well, it's because it hasn't been updated. Mr. Davis, myself, Mr. Groy are all going to undertake the challenge of putting together the most accurate and up-to-date regulation and policy handbook for our members. This might be a good time to look at that, Mark. So I think this is a wonderful idea that I think that as long as Mark will help me with that.
Yeah.
Always good to help you, Jackson.
That's great. Okay, so I mean, with any policy changes and things, obviously, as since we reformed this committee and we haven't been doing it for too long, it's always good to look at our documentation and make sure we don't have a dead link and something else go in a different direction. So I'll defer that to Tim and the office here to kind of start that process, and then we can bring it back for being like, hey, we've updated this. This is where everything's at. Because I mean, I will admit, when I have sent the policy like on concussion management to a few different people, it's kind of messy. There's some messiness. There's things that need to be cleaned up, and it's nobody's fault. It's just we do these things on the fly. We got to get these things done. We got to get them quick. And turnover and leadership in certain things is we're getting our feet underneath us. And so I think that's a great action item for us to start looking at forward and bringing that back to the next meeting and kind of saying, here's our policies, here's these different various things, here's where they're located. So thank you, Mark. That's an excellent suggestion. Okay, other future agenda items.
Didn't he ask about?
Oh, sorry. Did we ask until that?
Mark, Did you ask about air quality?
Oh yeah, I mean, air quality was one of the things that came up a lot yesterday because we're getting fires from Southern California. And I'm sure the northern winds are going to bring your fires down here too. So, that
We-
was
We don't have to recreate the wheel on that. A lot of school districts have one, and that leads into their athletics. The NCAA is less restrictive than, say, some of these, like Washoe County School District. But there are really good policies out there with good numbers, and I don't know if somebody needs one. We can certainly give them a couple that are good. Certainly up here we go with the Washoe County School District for the high school, and like I said, the college is a little bit less restrictive. They'll let the air quality go up a little higher. But those numbers are pretty standard and out there. So if somebody wants one, we can send it.
Mhm.
They could create their own, or if Clark County School District, do they have one?
Yes,
yeah.
Okay.
they canceled all of our outdoor practices and games yesterday because of it.
Okay.
But only Clark County School District did. So I think
Correct,
that's
correct.
important to keep in mind. The charters, if they were not playing a Clark County school, they still held practices, they still had stuff. So I think that's kind of where Mark is probably coming from, is this having a policy coming from the NIAA or from the SMAC to kind of make that uniform across the state.
Mhm. Yeah,
We had
that's
one
easy.
site already cancel their games for Friday here in Reno. It's Damani Ranch. They're on the south end of town, so it's understandable. So I don't know if we'll have any others, but at least we had one.
I know that is a theme that comes up every 2 to 3 years here, at least locally in different areas. So I think that is an action item that we do need to start looking at developing and sending that out, because the last thing we do need is for people to misunderstand it, or not I mean, airgov dot air
AirNow.
airnow.gov, sorry. Looking at some of those sensors, I did get some actual questions locally from a few parents saying, like, can we hold practices? But this sensor here says air quality is fine, but the one next to the field says 100. So I'm going to go with this one over here instead. That people will kind of snake around some of these. I understand that.
Can we get a copy of the Clark County School District policy, and we've got the Washoe County, and look at them and see how close they are. Maybe we can make something from those.
Yeah,
Carson's is virtually word for word the same as Washoe, FYI.
Yeah.
Same policy.
And I haven't seen Clark County's. I reached out to Pam Sloan and Xavier yesterday. And they basically said that they were looking into it and they would give me an update as soon as they heard something. So it's coming at a level that I'm not involved in, but I know Pam's on this committee, so I'm sure that when she gets back from vacation this week, she can probably share it with Tim.
Oh, Mark Stovak jumped in here. Hey, Mark. Marcus stated that we use a defined sensor that is a purple air at UNR and assume UNLV is the same Mountain West policy. Yeah. So, yeah.
It's less restrictive than the high school.
It is.
Or the
It is.
school districts typically.
Is our cutoff still 100? Does anybody know off the top of their head?
The high schools are 150. We suspend outdoor activities at 150, which is the unhealthy range, the red range, if you're using the AirNow or the airnow.gov scale. But if we're in that orange range, you're still allowed to do outdoor activity, but you're supposed to monitor athletes with known respiratory issues and reduce conditioning volumes, things like that, between 100 and 150. But we don't suspend outdoor activities until we're over 150 or in that red unhealthy zone.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other discussion on air quality index policy?
Yep. Okay, just so you are aware, related, maybe not so related. Some people in Clark County may be familiar with this. I know Jeremy is going to be very familiar with this. We recently in the NIA office partnered with Perryweather as the official weather provider for the NIAA. And one of the, because Jeremy will know how strong I was for this, trying to get this into all of the districts in the South for over a year. But one of the things that they are providing us is one of their monitors. We will have one of their units. It will be mobile, it will be ours to use. So I think that when we look at this stuff, we will be able to, air quality is one of the things it measures, along with lightning strikes, ground temperature. Perryweather is a very forward-thinking company that does a wonderful job. A lot of East Coast district states, Texas has it, Virginia has it. There are statewide adoptions of their software and their platform. But the best part about it is, I think the air quality is in the area exactly where the unit is, as opposed to maybe a monitoring station that is not close. I will tell you that ran into that a couple times in the South with monitoring the air quality and the ground temperature from McCarran Airport is substantially different than it is at maybe Centennial High School, which is a good 20 miles away. If maybe a little exaggeration on the distance there, but you know what I'm talking about. So as I get more information on the Perryweather unit, I will bring that in to the committee, because it is going to be a valuable asset.
Excellent. Okay, great. Any other discussion on that, or should we look at other future agenda items? Okay. Any other future agenda items from anybody? All right, I'll jump in very quickly just to say that we are working on a potential new bill that looks at funding athletic trainers. If you have any questions on the model that we're going after, look at the Delaware. Delaware recently passed a very similar model that, I mean, it's pretty much identical to it. And it stipulates that basically athletic trainers who are either going to be working at the schools in some manner or another are coming in at a very baseline teacher salary, with all the accoutrements that are associated with that. So benefits, all that fun stuff. So it is it's a very expensive bill. The bill also does stipulate from the Delaware side that if it's being provided by private entities like Dignity Health in those different areas, or Carson Tahoe, they can still continue to do that. They just have to change maybe some of the ways that they run their parameters. It doesn't exclude the athletic trainers from working as a teacher, but it does say that there should be some limit on the hours. There should be some limit on when they're coming in to teach, or if they want to go directly full teaching versus doing athletic training services. But at least there's a position at each high school within the state that is at a bare minimum base teacher salary with the benefits available for an athletic trainer. Kind of just speaking on the money side, it's most likely going to cost a pretty penny. I think what we've estimated so far is about 2.8 million per year, which is huge. So that's
can I chime in with something?
Yep.
When you say a base teacher salary, is there a way we can make sure we make a distinction that it should be at the master's base teacher salary, since an athletic trainer is going to be coming in with a master's degree? Because a base teacher salary is still a bachelor's degree, which is significantly less than if you come in with a master's degree. So I just throwing it out there. You should probably differentiate a master's level teacher. Just throwing it out there.
No, that's a good point. Aren't there still folks though that have licensures that don't have the masters yet, or has that been fully phased in? I feel like there's still some who do not have the masters yet.
There are still some that are just bachelors.
Coming in,
So
new
I guess
grads coming in. I thought we had phased those out. Are we still? They're still under.
Older ones that have been licensed for, if you've been licensed more than 10 years, you may not have gotten a master's.
No, yeah, I understand that. I'm just saying,
But
even those
this-
guys, I feel like should be at a master's level. Anyway,
This is the last year that you can get a bachelor. So UNLV has a senior class right now that are
Okay.
all going to be graduating with a bachelor's degree. So this is the last graduating class this year that will be coming out with a bachelor's.
Yeah, and I'm aware of that too, because we're looking at possibly creating a AT program up at UNR as well. And I think that's something to note, that basically like you have to be flexible on the salary schedule or for the requirements. I mean, it's what do we always put in job ads? Commiserate with experience. Yeah. So I think that's one of those where it's like we need to do that. But if it goes forward, obviously, I think there's a lot of uphill battle to go forward with, because one of the positives that Delaware had is that they mostly had this already going at all the school districts, so it wasn't a huge ask, but they still had a huge fiscal note applied to it. So we're kind of just exploring it. I mean, like, again, this is something that's been a bucket list item for myself personally. I think it's extremely important. I think athletic training services save lives. I mean, I think none of us here are going to argue that. We've seen that play out time and time again, even with NFL, everything. Everyone will not debate the importance of it, but will legislators debate the money side of it and the cost of that? That's going to be a real challenge as well, because there are some school districts that if I'm not mistaken, I'm not going to say a name of school district, but I looked at the base salaries for a lot of these school districts, and some of them are considerably higher to attract people. You know, there's some of the rural areas that start at 67,000 versus some in Washoe that are 42. You know, obviously, that's very low in terms, in my mind, in terms of teaching salaries, and they should be higher. However, that's not the job of this committee. But what it is that knowing that we're working towards this and garnishing the support for it, I think is something to keep on people's minds. So do not be surprised if we reach out and say, hey guys, what are your thoughts on this? Just moving forward. So just keeping that in mind. And I don't think this is necessarily something that needs to be discussed heavily at this point. I think it's one of those, just to keep your ears to your emails and taking a look at those things. And we'll obviously keep you updated as things move forward. And then possibly asking for support. If we are able to get it down to a committee to certain reasons, we would ask for some people to come testify at certain points. Okay, that's it from my end, and I think that's the conclusion of the items. Right, correct? So I'm going to turn it back over to Tim here. Let me mute myself.
All right. This time provides an opportunity for citizens to address the committee about any matter not on the agenda. Items raised during this portion of the agenda cannot be deliberated or acted upon. Should a member of the public wish to speak on a matter not listed on the agenda, it is asked that said person please complete a green public comment card and submit it to the committee chair prior to the opening of this item. A limit of 3 minutes per person and/or 5 minutes for the spokesman of the particular group may be imposed. It is requested that comments be directed to the committee as a whole. Comments that are determined to be irrelevant, repetitious, offensive, inflammatory, willfully disruptive, or deemed to be personal attacks will not be permitted. We currently have no one here, and no emails have been received. So with that, this meeting is adjourned, and I thank